Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by two of my trusty colleagues, Cris and Dr. D'Antonio, Dante D'Antonio. Hi, guys.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Good day, isn't it? Jobs
Good
Friday.
day. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, feels pretty good. We'll have to come back to that. We got a guest, Mike Strain. Mike, good to see you again.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I can't remember. Mike is the director of economic policy. I got that right? The director of economic policy studies at AEI, American Enterprise Institute. Yeah. And you've been on before, Mike.
I have been on before. I have been on a few times.
A few times. Oh, really? I didn't know. I kind of lost track. I'm getting old. That means you must have been right. Whatever you said, it must have been right.
Not good enough to operate the microphone, but good enough to come back.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. I mean, we're going to talk about the election, the candidates, their policies, the implications for the economy. But as I mentioned, this is a big day. This is Jobs Friday, and we got the jobs report for the month of September. So I thought we just kind of dive right into that. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. But Dante, what do you think? You want to give us the nuts and bolts of the report?
Yeah, hard to argue that it was a better month than we've seen in a while. Headline job growth, 254,000 plus positive revisions to the last 2 months. I think really sort of changed the picture of where the labor market stands today. If you go back a month ago, the 3-month average of job growth was only 116,000. Now with revisions and the strong number in September, that's up to 186,000. I think, we've talked about before, I think true trend job growth is probably somewhere between those two. We're probably a little high now, but I think the last couple of months had understated sort of the pace of job gains. And so I think we're back to a more sustainable level at this point.
So what do you think the underlying rate of monthly job growth is?
I think it's between 150 and 175.
150 and 175. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we're a little above that today. I think obviously this is probably
Right.
a little bit hot in terms of what is reality in terms of the labor market, but industry composition looked pretty good. I'd say thing of particular note there: healthcare, leisure and hospitality, the public sector, still the sort of primary of job growth as they've been really over the last year or more. If you're looking for something to complain about, I guess you could look at either average weekly hours or the measure of aggregate hours. Both ticked down a little bit despite the big job gain. Wage growth came in a little bit strong again.
Quickly on the hours, because
Yeah.
that on the face of it is the only real blemish in the report, if you want to call it a blemish. But could that be just compositional, just industry mix effects as opposed to anything more fundamental?
I think so. I mean, it was only a tenth of an hour in terms of the average weekly hours, which I never try to read too much into.
Yeah.
We get those tenth of an hour up and down movements pretty frequently. Wage growth was strong for the second month in a row. It's still only at 4% year over year, which I don't think is problematic in terms of thinking about potential impacts on inflation. But I think if you're looking for something to criticize, it could be that wage growth looks like it could be sort of warming up again, at least over the last couple of months. On the household survey side of things, it was a positive story as well. The unemployment rate edged lower again for the second straight month. We're down to 4.1% after we were up at 4.3% in July. And it declined again for the right reasons. Labor force growth is still there, but household employment growth outpaced it this month, caused the unemployment rate to come down a little bit. So I think mostly a positive story on the household survey side of things as well.
You mentioned average hourly earnings. Did you say it was 4% year over year in the month?
4% year over year. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you go back a year, 2, 3 ago, if we had 4%, people would be hair on fire. That's too strong. That's inflationary. What do you say about that today?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case today. I mean, if the productivity growth numbers that we've seen over the last couple of quarters hold up, if I see Chris's face over there, if they hold up, I think 4% is more than sustainable in the world that we're in with what productivity growth has looked like over the last couple of quarters.
Yeah. So, of course, it's an inside joke because I don't know how inside it is, but because we've talked about it on Inside Economics, but you're the productivity bear, aren't you, Dante? And Cris has been the productivity bull, and he's just pointing. He's just, without saying it, he's pointing out that these productivity numbers are pretty good, and that allows for, as you said, allows for strong wage growth without that being inflationary.
Right. That's right.
That's right. That's all you have to say on the subject is that's right.
Well, I'm not going to try to argue against Chris. His position has looked pretty good on productivity growth of late. So I'm not willing to concede
Well,
the
actually,
argument just yet.
I
But
want to come back to that productivity question, right? Because I was in Canada this past week, and the big, believe it or not, they've all got their own political issues. Trudeau and Justin Trudeau, and it looks like they're gonna call an election. He's not going to win, so there's going to be a change in government. But the key economic questions around productivity that, U.S. is barreling along. Productivity growth has been very strong, and Canada not so much. So, what's the difference? So let's come back to that. But anything else broadly on the jobs report you want to call out before we move forward?
no, it was a good report, like
It's
you
a good
said. I think
report.
in my mind, it's about time, right? We had this sort of string of, I think, weaker than average and weaker than we expected reports, and we finally got one that you could feel good about.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think? Consistent with your take? I'm assuming I know you've been busy teaching young minds this morning. We were emailing back and forth substitution and income effects, and I got a cold sweat when I heard that.
They're very important.
Do you remember those blue books? You take the
Oh yeah.
tests in the blue book. Do they still take tests in the blue books, or are they well beyond that?
They don't take this in the blue books, and that's a source of discomfort for me. So I make them come in with their own paper because I think you
Right.
can still get the blue books, but they're very hard to get.
Ah,
Wow.
So I tell them, back in the old days, we used to use these blue books, but for me to acquire those for you would be extremely difficult. So please bring a stack of paper in and write on that.
yeah. I'll have to tell you, I don't dream very much, but when I dream about those damn blue books. They they really made an impression on me. Where do you teach? Where are you teaching?
Georgetown in the
Oh,
policy school.
Georgetown. Oh,
Mhm.
great. Oh, great. A lot of smart kids there for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
They're terrific.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think about the jobs numbers? I assume you
I
had a
mean,
chance to take a look.
I've had the out of consensus minority view that the Fed, though right to be worried about both inflation and unemployment, kind of has the weights backwards. And I've had the view that the inflation risk is greater than the unemployment risk. And so I was surprised that the Fed cut by 50 in September. I was surprised that markets were, pricing a substantial probability, at times a likelihood that the Fed would cut by 50 in November. And so, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised to see the really strong report this morning. And I think it's hard. I think it's hard to really know what to make of the monthly job gain numbers, just given everything that's happening in the labor market with immigration. But the unemployment rate is a ratio, and that makes it, I think, easier to interpret. And so to me, the big number was the unemployment rate falling again, and that's consistent, I think, with a labor market that is, in great shape, and that is powering earnings and income, and therefore consumption throughout the economy.
So the Fed's trying to balance these two objectives. One is full employment, the other is inflation that's low and
Mhm.
stable. And recently, in the last few weeks, few months, since Jackson Hole, it
Mhm.
feels like when
Yep.
Powell gave his speech about we need to focus more on the full employment mandate, that
Mhm.
he was becoming more concerned that the economy was weakening to the degree that we need to start moving on rates. You're saying uh, that he still needs to be really focused on the inflation mandate, that isn't quite as we're
Yeah, I
okay.
think that's right. I mean, the way I would say it, so for a while, the Fed was only focused on inflation, putting no weight on unemployment, and that was appropriate when we had 9% CPI inflation, 8%, 7% CPI inflation. We're very far from that world, and so the Fed should be focusing on both sides of its mandate. But I think I kind of interpret the Fed and the consensus view of economists to be, okay, mission accomplished on inflation. The unemployment rate's been going up, and that's a big problem and a signal of potential labor market weakness, not just weakening, but weakness. And therefore, we need to really address that unemployment rate, and we don't really need to worry about inflation. And my reading of the labor market has been that it's very strong. Um, the unemployment rate, did go up, but it went up from the kind of mid threes, which
Mm-hmm.
was just unsustainably low,
Mm-hmm.
and is consistent with transitioning back to a normal economy from a kind of pandemic era economy. And but over the past year, I don't see a lot of labor market weakness. The labor market is weaker than it was in 2022, but over the past year, I don't see a lot of labor market weakening. And I certainly don't see any reason to think the labor market is weak or on the precipice
Mm-hmm.
of becoming weak. Whereas I think uh, inflation, you know, uh, runs the risk of kind of getting stuck at 2.6%, 2.7%, something like that.
Which is
Maybe
where we
kind of,
are right now,
which is
right?
where we are right now,
Yeah.
and maybe kind of gradually drifting down to 2.5 or 2.4.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's kind of gotta. I think the Fed has had the right approach to this. We need sustainable progress toward the target. That is inconsistent with inflation getting stuck at 2.5 or 2.6.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I kind of look at things, I see a labor market that doesn't seem to be weakening over the past year, a labor market that's very strong, and inflation that seems to be kind of stuck above 2.5%. And that suggests to me that they're worried about the wrong thing.
Mm.
um, and kind of left me unsurprised this morning when job gains were around 100,000 higher than consensus. The unemployment rate went down, and wage growth accelerated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, so the Fed did cut rates from 5.5% or just south of 5.5 to 5. That's the half point or 50 basis point cut in rates. And I think most economists, certainly on the Fed, and I would concur, is that 5% is still high compared to what you might consider
Mhm.
equilibrium. Equilibrium being that rate at which interest rates, monetary policy is neither supporting or restraining growth. So this 5% is still high enough that it's restraining growth. It's
Mhm.
restrictive, as they would say. And still, therefore, still focused on inflation to some degree, trying to
Mhm.
make sure to get inflation. Would you agree with that kind of frame, the way I just framed it? Is that
Yeah, I
right?
think
Yeah.
I think I'd agree with that frame. And so if we're kind of operating within that frame, the big question is, what's the destination?
Yep.
And the Fed thinks the destination is 2.9%. Kind of roughly speaking. It's hard to talk about the funds rate now that we've switched to this range, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Fed,
Yeah.
the Fed thinks it's around 2.9%. Investors think it's around 2.9%. The Fed forecast that it was going to get to around 3.4% by the end of 2025. Markets thought, at least I haven't looked this morning, but markets thought as of a few days ago that the Fed was going to get down to 2.9% by the end of 2025. And I think both the Fed's forecast for the next 15 months and market expectations for the next 15 months is getting the destination wrong, and getting kind of the velocity along the path to that destination wrong. um I agree that 5 is very likely still restrictive. um but I think it's an open question, how restrictive. I mean, maybe instead of 2.9, the
Mm-hmm.
magic number is 4 or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And then if that's the case, we're in a very different world. The 5 and 3/8 that we were at before the September cut just looks a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
And 50 points below that, also looks a lot different. I mean, why do I think this? Financial variables are not acting like they're under a lot of pressure from the Fed's policy rate. The stock market's been going gangbusters. The kind of real inflation adjusted rate of interest, is on a 10-year bond is kind of around 2%, hasn't really gone up over the past year. Overall financial conditions have eased back. So, credit spreads, bond yields, equity prices, exchange rates, they're, when you kind of aggregate all those up and try and, form one index out of them, we're back to, kind of where we were in 2022 in terms of how restrictive overall financial conditions are. And so, not, certainly not back to where we were, prior to the Fed's hiking cycle, but we're financial conditions are considerably less restrictive than they were throughout 2022 or throughout 2023. So
of course, just a pushback there, just a little pushback. I mean, the markets are anticipating some pretty aggressive rate cutting by the Fed.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So they have. I mean, if you look at futures, and I haven't looked in the last few days either, but last I looked, they had that funds rate coming back into 3 here by this, I think by this time next year. So that's a pretty aggressive set of rate cutting.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree that that's driving it. And so, that's why it's important to also look at real economy variables. And, the unemployment rate's been coming down, not up, over the last 2 months. It did go up, but I think it went up because of a big increase in the size of the workforce, and those new workers didn't immediately get jobs. Layoff rates, as reported by the JOLTS, show no upward trend over the last year, and layoff rates are lower than they were in 2019 prior to the pandemic. So, if you go by the JOLTS, you're not seeing evidence of an upward trend in layoffs. That's consistent with the unemployment rate coming down as it has done over the last 2 months. You're not seeing, I think, a downward trend in consumer spending. That's consistent with the labor market continuing to, kind of power earnings for workers. The economy grew at a 3% annual rate in the second quarter. That's above potential. That will create inflationary pressure, not create disinflationary pressure. And the last time I looked, the economy was on track to, according to nowcast estimates of the third quarter, the economy was on track to grow 2.5, 3%, something like that. In the current quarter, those nowcast estimates are going to go up, I think, after this morning's report. And so that's not below potential, certainly. If we had two,
although I could make a case, right? I mean, with labor force and productivity kind of added up. I mean, the economy has grown 3% over the past year over year through Q2 2024. But the unemployment rate rose during that period. As you mentioned earlier, it was in the mid 3s. Now it's around 4. So that would suggest that actually potential, not that it's sustainable for any length of time, but potential over the past year may actually have been higher than 3%.
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't think. Yes, for sure. And I should say that I think the consensus view and the Fed view is a reasonable view. There have been times over the past 4 years where I've thought the Fed was unreasonable in its outlook. But this is not one of them. I think the world definitely could unfold.
Okay, so if you were like king for the week, Fed cut, now we're 5, and of course things change given events, but what do you think is the path here?
I think there's a real question about whether or not the Fed should be cutting at all for the rest of this year.
Okay.
We did this big aggressive cut in September, and there's a meeting in November, there's a meeting in December. Imagine the next jobs report shows the unemployment rate goes down again. I don't know. Now we're at a 4% unemployment rate. The Fed has indicated, I think, that they think of 4.4% as kind of the you know stable, sustainable rate over time.
Right.
So, right now we're at 4.1% unemployment rate, so below that long-term sustainable unemployment rate, and we're well above 2% price inflation. Not catastrophically above it like we have been, but the Fed should be uncomfortable with the current inflation rate. Another month of data that shows the unemployment rate is still comfortably below 4.4%. Another month of inflation data that shows that the rate of inflation is still comfortably above 2%. I'm not sure, yes, if you really bet the house that 2.9% is the neutral interest rate, where the Fed is neither accelerating and stimulating the economy nor holding the economy back, then sure, keep cutting. But when I look at financial markets,
Yeah.
they don't seem unduly burdened. When I look at the labor market, it does not seem weak. And when I look at the consumer's still spending.
I'll have to say, if we were both on the FOMC, it would be a really interesting set of meetings. Yeah, you're on the opposite side of this one than I am, so it would make for a great discussion, like this,
Yes.
like the podcast. Hey, Cris, let me bring you into the conversation. So, taking it back to the job numbers, anything you want to call out there? Anything that Dante missed, and just generally, how are you thinking about the number and what it means for the economy?
Yeah, it was a strong report. I agree with Dante's assessment there. The revisions are something that I focused on. They're particularly high for July, so we're kind of restating.
Although August always gets revised up, right, Dante? I mean, August is always the first print is low, as they say, and then
Almost
it
always,
gets
yeah.
revised up. It's like invariable. Yeah.
Yeah, but July
anyway.
was at what, 55 and went to 144.
Oh, is that right? That got a big revision up too?
Big jump.
I missed that.
So,
yeah.
That kind of recolors our history here a bit in terms of what we were thinking at the time in terms of Fed policy. So,
right.
Yeah, but otherwise, I think this was a strong report. Again, hard to find any blemishes. The work week perhaps is the one, but about it.
Right. Okay. So you're feeling pretty good then.
I am.
And let me ask, and forget about the fact that I'm your boss, but who would you agree with here? More with me or with Mike? See how he's
some have the
he doesn't know what to say.
Some have the connection. On what aspect? I think we both agreed that this was a good report.
Thinking about the dual mandate and what the weight should be on full employment vis-a-vis inflation, Mike's putting more weight on on the inflation risk. I'm putting more weight on the unemployment rate, or at least I have been. That may not have come through in this conversation, but if you're a listener to the podcast, you know this, that I've been more focused on the unemployment rate. Which one would you put more weight on, or not?
So I think it's been clear too. I'm a little bit below. I would be more balanced, or have been more balanced throughout this period. I am worried that there could be some shock that causes inflation to spike. So you can't ignore inflation.
See how good he is, Mike. See what he does. He says, "Okay, I'm going right down the middle of these two guys."
But he should be the Fed chairman.
He should be the Fed chair. Exactly. Yeah,
I agree. They haven't offered me the job yet, but
he's very good at committee management.
Committee management. Yeah, exactly. I do want to get to the election, but before I get there, I do want to talk about one potential threat to the economy that I think has come to the fore. Actually, until last night, there was two potential threats. One was the strike at the ports, the dock workers, but that seems to have now been reasonably settled, and it's not going to be. It doesn't feel like that's going to be an issue. But the other, obviously, is what's going on in the Middle East and the growing conflict between Israel and Iran, and the potential for that bleeding out. How worried are you about that, Mike? Is that something that you're reasonably worried about?
Yeah, I'm pretty worried about it. I mean, I'm not expert on the Middle East or foreign policy, but every single expert on the Middle East and foreign policy I've spoken to is quite worried about the situation. All sorts of reasons to be worried about it. One of the reasons is economic, and on the economics, a big spike in the price of oil will kind of the classic definition of a supply price shock that will affect headline inflation.
Yeah. The key link seems to be oil prices, right? That's the key, I think, at least most immediate. So far, I think the markets have priced in about a $5-10 barrel kind of risk premium price. I mean, if you go back a week or two ago before things really went off the rails here, I think oil, WTI Brent was south of $70, and now we're sitting 75 to $80. So if that's the end of the story, then that's not great. But that means price for a gallon of regular unleaded goes from $3.20 to $3.50, $3.60, and that that becomes more of an issue. But if it goes higher than that, then it feels like that becomes a real problem. And then obviously complicates that balance the Fed has to make, right, between growth and inflation.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the U.S. economy is quite a lot. It's quite a lot different than it was a half century ago with respect to oil prices. And so, we have a lot of oil producers. They benefit from higher prices. We have a lot of people who drive cars, and we move a lot of goods around the country and on trucks, and consumers and purchasers of goods are hurt when oil prices go up. I think these are often, kind of a wash. And so the effect on GDP, on economic output, I'm not super worried about. But, this will affect headline price inflation. Obviously, oil prices bleed into core inflation in important ways. So this could put upward pressure on core, and likely would. And inflation expectations are quite responsive to oil prices as well. And so, at a time when the Fed is trying to get inflation back down to 2, this is going to make that a lot harder.
Right. Hey, Cris, Dante, anything to add to that threat risk? I mean, am I missing something? I think the key link is back to us, to the U.S. economy, at least most immediately, would be through oil prices. There's no other, maybe confidence. I'm not sure. What other channels are there?
I would think confidence. I'm actually a little bit more worried about confidence, oddly enough, because I think the Saudis have capacity to fill a gap if it should occur, right? So I think oil prices certainly could spike, but I don't see them necessarily spiking or maintaining a high level for an extended period of time. The confidence impact, though, and the human tragedy, of course, are the more disturbing pieces of this that I think could, certainly have an economic impact as well.
Yeah, I suppose if there's unrest on university campuses again, that would be. Is that what you mean by confidence? That something like that?
Yeah, or just in general, right? If it's a conflict that is spreading throughout, I mean, you're going to see consumers perhaps hunkering down. Perhaps the expectations for oil prices would be impacting behavior. So that's what I'm thinking. But yeah, there certainly could be a domestic unrest or impact as well.
Right. Okay. Dante, anything to add on that threat?
No, I think that, between oil prices and confidence, I think those are the two main ways that we would have to think about a potential impact.
Okay. All right. Before we go to the election and what all that means for economic policy and the economic outlook, let's play the game, the stats game. Mike, are you going to play this game?
Yeah, I'll play.
Okay, you'll play.
But I can't go first.
Okay, Dante. No, definitely Dr. D'Antonio goes first here. We're missing Marissa. I forgot to mention that. Where's Marissa? She's our other co-host.
Unfortunately, she's not feeling well.
Not feeling well. Okay. Sorry about that, Marissa. Because Marissa generally goes first. But Dante will step in. So the game is we each put forward a stat. The rest of the group tries to figure that out with questions, clues, deductive reasoning. A good stat is one that's not so easy. We get it immediately. One that's not so hard, we never get it. And if it's apropos to the topic at hand, and we've been talking about jobs, the Fed, and we will be talking about the election, then this doesn't have to be. This is a good way to make a point. So Dante, you want to go first?
I will go first. The stat is 12.6.
But now wait a second. This may be, did you listen to last week's podcast?
I don't think I did. No. Did I just reuse a stat from last week?
I'm pretty sure you did. 12.6 is the job's easy to hard to get in the
It is, but I'm going to go to number 2 then. We'll just go to number 2. I was going back to last week to make a point.
Are you kidding me?
That's what I get for not listening to last week, apparently. That's my
Hey, Mike,
my
how
punishment.
impressed are you? I mean, come on. And I nailed that last week, didn't I, Cris?
You did.
Dante, you
I
need
just
to
gave
start
him
listening to this
a victory
podcast.
lap is all I did.
Yep.
Actually, this is a commentary on, you're not listening to this podcast?
I usually do.
I'm going to make this,
last week
this should be mandatory.
You're going to put it on my calendar? Yeah. Required
Holy
listening.
cow. All right. Well, before we move on, everyone's asking what's the 12.6. So, but just quickly tell what's the 12.6.
Sure. It's the labor market differential. It's from the Conference Board survey. It's essentially the difference between people who feel like jobs are plentiful versus people who think jobs are hard to get. It's come down an awful lot over the last year or so, and signals that consumers are feeling less and less good about the state of the labor market, despite sort of how things have been holding up.
Okay, Mike, this is going to blow your mind. I'm going to impress you. And yeah, I know you're very hard to impress, but I'm going to impress you. And I'm going to ask it as a question to Dante. I'm going to put Dante on the hot seat. Dante, this is the Conference Board survey being done. It goes back into the 70s. What is the average of the jobs hard to get survey? And actually, I say that I'm not sure if they've been asking that question back into the 70s. I don't know how long they've been asking the question. But if you take an average throughout the historical record, what is it?
It's negative. It's like -3, I think. Some -3, -5, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's slightly below 0.
That's pretty good. It's negative 0.5. Negative
0.5. Okay.
Yeah. So very close to 0. So,
yeah.
Neither hard or easy to get. So we're still, what your point is it's coming in, right? And it's as low as it's been since, as you said, 2021, but it's still, saying pretty healthy job market.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back, in the entire lead up to the Great Recession, it never got as high as it still is today, right? Between 2001 and 2017, it was never 12.6. It was below that the entire time. So it was very, very high, right before the pandemic and right afterwards, but that was sort of unusual if you look at the longer history of the series, right? So even though it looks like we're down a lot, it's still not sort of signaling the consumers feel that bad relative to a longer history.
Okay, good. Hey, Cris, you want to go next?
Sure. My number is 78.1.
78.1 in the jobs report?
Yes.
Payroll survey?
No.
Household survey?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a EPOP measure, employment to population measure?
It's not quite.
Participation rate.
Yes.
Yeah. For prime age workers?
Prime age.
There you go.
Men. Women. Men.
Prime age men.
No, women.
Women. Oh, it's women.
Prime age women.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's too low for men.
Too low.
Too low for men. That's right. Men is 89.5, but 78.1 prime age women's labor force participation rate. It's rising. That's a record high, right?
Oh,
so
it is.
We continue.
Okay.
Oh, it matches a record high, I should say.
Right.
So it's women continue to really see expansion in terms of those labor market, in terms of their employment, labor force participation. It's really positive. So.
Yeah. I mean, the only demographic group where participation rates aren't back to pre-pandemic is the older group, isn't it? Like 65 plus. Do you know, Dante? I think that's right.
I think that's right.
Yeah, if you look at like broad age groups, I think 65.
Yeah, broad age groups. Yeah,
that's not back to pre-pandemic.
Everyone else is back.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good one. I think EPOP, employment to population, that's my go-to measure for. I like the unemployment rate as a measure of full employment, but EPOP, and EPOP is for prime age is 80.9, right, Dante?
Yep. Yeah, that's
right. It's been there for
a couple of months. Yeah.
Well, I think a whole year. It's been more or less,
Yeah.
More or less it goes up and down. So very consistent with a full employment economy. Okay, Mike, you want to go?
30.33.
Ooh. In the job numbers?
In the job report.
Payroll survey?
Payroll survey.
30.33. in the units are, it's not thousands, is it?
No.
Okay. So is it kind of an index, a diffusion index? Oh, he's doing something like that.
It's dollars.
Dollars. Oh, I thought you were, dollars. 30. Oh, is that like, it's got to be some measure of wages, right?
Average hourly earnings.
It's not overall wages, is it? No,
That's
because that's too
35.
high. It must be for the dock worker, the transportation workers or something.
Your answer is proving my point. The point I want to make. Average
Okay,
hourly
go ahead.
earnings for production and non-supervisory workers.
Uh,
The lowest paid, 80% roughly. Production workers in the manufacturing sector, non-supervisory workers in the services sector, higher than it's ever been, and higher than it's ever. So that's nominal, but also higher than it's ever been when adjusted for inflation.
So the highest it's ever been adjusted for inflation. Okay. So another a sign of strength in the labor market?
Sure.
Yep. Okay. No, this reminds me, you wrote a book about kind
The
of
American Dream.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think you published it the day the pandemic hit or something, as I recall. Am I
think the
right?
pandemic demonstrates that the American Dream is alive and well.
Yeah. Did I get that right? Because I remember getting the book and the whole world it seemed like it was falling apart at that point.
Well, I don't know how long it took to get it to you in the mail, but
okay.
yeah, it came out in early 2020.
Early 2020. Yeah, I remember this very well. And I was like, I can't wait to read this because it was controversial.
It was very controversial.
It was a bit controversial. And then we got it all swept up. I got to go back and read that book.
Yeah, it's real good.
It's a good book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Did you wipe it down with the
with a Clorox wipe?
I might have. At that point, I was wiping down everything.
Yeah.
I was pretty spooked. Okay. I think we've had enough of the game. Let's move on to the election. So Mike, I know this is a bit of a parlor game, but in our world, this is kind of critical because we have to put pen to paper, produce a forecast. So we have to have some expectation for fiscal policy, economic policy more broadly, and therefore we have to have some expectation about how this election is all going to play out. Do you have kind of a view on that? What's the most likely scenario here in your mind in terms of how this is all going to play out in terms of the makeup of government?
Yeah, I would bet, I think, on Republicans keeping the Senate. That seems like the piece of the puzzle we can be most certain about. I would bet on Vice President Harris winning the election, and I would bet on Democrats winning the House of Representatives. But of those three, I have the most confidence in the Senate.
That's like exactly our baseline, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly our baseline. Of course, we have an election model that we use, and so at the state electoral college level, we're predicting, the percent of the vote that goes to the incumbent party by state, and on the right-hand side, we have a bunch of political factors and economic factors. And right now, it shows the state of PA, Pennsylvania, my home state, our home state. We're all Dante and Cris, you're in PA too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So our vote really, that's the state that drives the train here, gets her to 270, but we have her winning. And of course, the Senate, as you say, goes Republican, and then we have the House going Democrat.
So, that's interesting. I thought most model-based forecasts had President Trump winning. So I'm interested.
Is that right?
I mean, that's just my impression. That could be wrong, but my impression is that most of the kind of model-based ones.
You mean like the FAIR model and those kind of models?
Yeah, well, yeah, or even I'm not sure what the FAIR model has, but I'm thinking more of the kind of polling aggregator models because they're building in a bias against Trump, right? So if the polls show that Harris is up by 2, that actually means she's down by 4, or the kind of that sort of thing. But I'm not sure. I don't know the details of how your model is built. Obviously,
I think the betting markets are closer to us on, aren't
they? They are.
Chris? They are.
Yes.
Both of they're saying Harris, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think The Economist also Although I don't know what the structure of their model is, but they're showing
They're
Harris.
saying Harris.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. 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 So if that's the makeup of government, then what does that mean about policy, economic policy, Mike?
Well, I think that this next cycle will be a little unusual because some policy kind of has to happen in 2025 with the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the expiration of many provisions, I should say, of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I think Vice President Harris is pretty clear she wants higher taxes on capital income, higher taxes on corporate income, um, higher taxes on the top 2% of household income earners. And she wants to preserve the Trump tax cuts for the bottom 98% of households. She's going to have a lot of opposition to that, I think, in a Republican Senate. And so, if I were doing your forecast, um, my baseline would be that the whole law gets extended for 2 years.
Oh, interesting. You mean the
And
individual tax cuts that expire at the end of 2025 under current law will be extended for the whole shooting match for everybody
that's
for 2 years?
that's my baseline. No, but no change in policy in 2025.
Okay. And but she doesn't get all this other stuff that she's been talking about, like taxing capital gains
I
or
don't think so.
so it's the status quo, pure
I
and simple.
would, if I had to do a forecast, that would be my baseline. Is there's no change in policy.
Right, right. What about anything outside of fiscal policy? Like, is that still the status quo too on trade regulation?
Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah,
she hasn't said a lot about trade,
right.
which itself I think is an indication that she doesn't have a strong appetite for expanding trade barriers. Um, I don't really think the Biden White House, at least initially, did either. But I think so then why did they keep the Trump tariff regime in place? I think a lot of it was domestic politics. Labor unions are an important part of the Democratic Party's constituency. And then I think a lot of it was actually foreign policy driven, where if you lowered the tariff rates on China, that would affect the US's posture in our
Right.
in our strategic competition. And so I would expect her to, I would expect her baseline to be to leave the tariff regime she inherits in place, but not really escalate it. And 4 years is a long time. Maybe something happens in a positive direction with U.S.-China relations. Tariff rates come down, but I would bet on stasis there as well. Um, on other stuff, I mean, look, I think she seems to be unattached to specific policy goals in a way that is kind of unusual in the pre 2020 history of U.S. politics, at least going back a half century or so. But she's going to want to, I think, have some accomplishments, and so I think my baseline expectation is that she works in a pragmatic way with the Congress that she encounters. Again, likely I think Republican Senate, and tries to move the ball on something in the housing market, move the ball on
Hmm.
something in the higher ed space.
What about
Yeah,
immigration? Do you think that's possible?
I mean,
They came pretty close, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
they
not too long
came they
ago.
came really, really close. I think we can maybe think about immigration in the same way we think about the 2025 tax cuts. I think the crisis on the border is kind of a forcing event in the same way that the expiration of the tax cuts are. And so, she the political pressure may mean that they have no choice. as you say, they came very close with Senator Langford's bill. And I know from talking to folks on the Hill that there's a lot of appetite to do something. And so, it wouldn't surprise me at all if she did something pragmatic and worked with the Republican Senate to get something done there. The compromise is obvious, right? I mean, trade border security for higher illegal immigration inflows, and you could the details matter, but the parameters are pretty clear.
Yeah, so it sounds like the economy we get in that scenario is the economy we have right now, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think the economy right now is in extremely strong shape, and if I were in your shoes, I think my baseline would be that would continue, until the economy hits some sort of shock, and that's obviously hard to forecast.
The one thing I worry about in that scenario is the debt limit, right? Because the debt limit is going to kick in again on January 1st, 2025. The Treasury is going to run out of cash at some point the summer of 2025. And, it feels like, every time we go down the debt limit path, we get closer and closer to a breach. It just feels that way to me. Is that something we should be worried about?
So when I think about the debt limit, I mean, I agree with your characterization. I think of that as being much more driven by Republicans than Democrats.
Right.
And specifically much more driven by House Republicans. And so, under the scenario that the House goes Democrat, there's a Democrat speaker. I think
you're less worried about that. Yeah.
I'm less worried. I'm less worried about kind of an accidental default, where, they leave it to the 11th hour, then like they don't get it done in time, and everybody flips out. I'm less worried about that.
I suppose it means if both the Senate and House go R, that becomes more of a threat then, more of a risk.
Oh, I'd be quite worried about that under that scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the most likely scenario, the baseline, and that's actually very similar to our baseline. Although you make a great point. In our baseline, we do assume that tax rates go up for folks that make over 400K. That's the threshold she's kind of chosen. Although, now that you say it, the way you said it, that resonates with me. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm basing this a lot off, I mean, I'm here in Washington, and I'm basing it a lot off conversations I'm having with members and with Phil staff. But rewriting tax law is politically and substantively very difficult. In 2017, there were some great members of Congress who really, were instrumental in passing a major change in tax law. Notably Paul Ryan, who had been, cared a lot about policy and was very, very knowledgeable about these issues. And a situation where you kind of have divided government, where there is no Paul Ryan like figure in Congress, and where there is the easy way out. You can just extend it. You can extend the whole thing. It seems to me that if you had to bet on, Congress, making substantive changes that made sense and add up, and blessed by the CBO and passed by both houses and signed by the president, all by a deadline, that's tough. Whereas waiting until 15 minutes before middle class taxes go up and signing a very short bill that says, hey, everything gets extended for 2 years, that's much easier.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me. 2 years, go to the midterm, see how Congress shakes out, and then go forward.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time, I know, but before we lose you, I want to consider one more scenario,
Mm-hmm.
election outcome. In my mind,
The asteroid hits the Earth, the oceans
yeah,
boil.
that's definitely a scenario. That's definitely a scenario. And maybe this scenario isn't too far off from that, but the second most likely scenario in my mind is a sweep, Republican sweep. Trump wins.
uh,
As you point out, the Senate's going R, and the
mhm,
House. In that case, it's very close. That could go either way. And if he
mhm,
wins, then likely he will pull, over those districts that are like in New York, just enough to maintain Republican control. So now you have a
mhm,
sweep.
mhm,
Okay. Do you agree with that characterization? That's the
mhm.
second most likely scenario.
Yeah, I
You
do. I
do.
do agree with
Okay.
that.
Okay. So what is policy? What is economic policy? Sorry, I shouldn't chuckle. What is economic policy in that scenario?
I think it's hard to. I think it's hard to know.
Okay.
You're hearing different things from the campaign.
Okay.
About important issues. 10% across the board tariff, 20% across the board tariff. Is the 10% like 10 percentage points plus existing tariffs, or does it just bring everybody to 10%? You know, but then you're also hearing from some corners of the campaign that that's not going to happen at all. And instead, it's going to be a reciprocal tariff regime where if you tariff us, we tariff you. If you don't tariff us, we don't tariff you. Who knows? President Trump, on immigration, President Trump is, very recently talking about giving foreign-born graduates of U.S. universities green cards when they graduate.
Hmm.
The campaign, you the Trump campaign, indicated that there might be uh, restrictions on that, probably based on what's your degree in, where'd you go to school, that sort of stuff. It's unclear what the kind of nature of those restrictions
Yeah, that sounds
are.
like immigration reform, right? That's the kind of thing you would
You sure? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
iron
It
out
sounds
there. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like part of immigration
Yeah.
reform. On tax policy, I'm not. I don't know. It's very hard to predict. Yogi Berra said predictions are hard, especially about the future.
Yeah.
They're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars of additional
Yeah.
tax cuts. I don't know that they could actually get away with that.
Really. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so
Just because
I'm
it adds so much to the deficits and debt, which are already very high, you think markets would react to that, and that'd be
yeah,
domino?
or before it got to that,
Uh-huh.
Congress, there even with the Republican sweep, there'd be enough deficit hawks in Congress
I
that
see.
and so I think even under a Republican sweep, I would probably still bet on just a blanket extension of the TCJA.
The Trump tax cuts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's hard to I think it's hard to know what I mean, in some ways, divided government is easier to
Yeah.
forecast than
Right.
what either party would do with unified control.
What about,
Um,
are you worried about what I call Fed capture? I mean, President
sure.
Trump you do worry about it. Former President Trump's talking about the president, meaning him, would
Mhm.
have input into interest rate policy, setting the Fed policy.
Yeah, I'm definitely worried about that.
You are worried about that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So tariffs, as you point out, who knows? A lot of this
Mhm.
is political posturing, bluster, talking. Some of it may be negotiation. You're just kind of
Mhm.
setting a stage for negotiation. But you were talking about tariffs. We're talking about. You didn't mention deportation. I don't know whether you think he'd go down that path, but
I mean, he seems to want to.
yeah,
He seems to strongly want to. I have serious doubts about uh the government's ability to execute the type of regime he's talking about. Um, how do you actually, how do you do that, right?
yeah,
How do you find, 500,000 or 1 million undocumented immigrants? How do you move them out of the country? I think there would be a lot of logistical and operational challenges to that, a lot of legal challenges to that for sure. And you know, the media would uh, cover that in a way that would, I think, create political pressure against continuing it. So, you know, if I were doing a forecast, my baseline would be that you know, there probably be some deportations, but you know, nothing like what President Trump was talking about. But you know, depending on the size of the sweep and the mood of the country, and you know, I'm certainly not an expert in the U.S.'s kind of state capacity to deport hundreds of thousands of people in a short period of time, and maybe we'd be able to do that, and maybe it would happen. If it did happen, you know, people are talking a lot about the inflation risk of a second Trump term if President Trump is reelected. I think the biggest inflation risk, I think, comes on the immigration side. So people are very focused on the tariffs causing immigration. Some people are concerned about the Fed. I'm sorry, people are concerned about the tariffs causing inflation. Some people are concerned about the Fed causing inflation. You know, I think if the Fed becomes subject to political influence, you know, I don't think that happens dramatically, right? Like, I don't think President Trump amends the Federal Reserve Act to put the president on the FOMC, or, you know, strolls down. I mean, I think it happens in a more subtle way. And I do worry about that structurally increasing inflation expectations. I think that takes some time to happen. You know, on the tariffs, I think you see a, you know, one-time spike in the price of imported goods. I'm not sure that feeds into inflation. But if President Trump really does deport hundreds of thousands of undocumented workers, you know, that could spark a kind of classic wage price inflationary spiral. And so that's, you know, that's where I think
you're concerned about inflation already.
Sure.
You're coming into this with your concern is on inflation not going back in, and this just adds to that concern.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. You know, I mean, the way we think about inflation, the way we you know, talk about it and teach it, is that it starts in the labor market. And I don't think that's what happened in the cycle we're exiting. But that is the kind of, you know, textbook way it happens. And you know, how do you get a big spike in wages? Well, you know, deport 500,000 workers in a 6-month period, and you know, see what happens.
Well, so it feels like to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll put words in your mouth and see how they taste. I mean, tariffs, some deportation, Fed capture, kind of the status quo on fiscal policy, continued deficit financed kind of government. Not that it's going to be more than what it is, but it still remains what it is. That does feel like a economy that has higher inflation, interest rates. The Fed's going to be battling that in somewhat diminished growth relative to the previous scenario we just described, the baseline. Does that sound right to you? Does that feel right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, somebody said that gridlock is the most beautiful word in the political lexicon.
Yes. Yeah. I thought you said that, Mike. I thought that was yours.
You know, at a time when you know, new laws tend to hurt the economy and not help the economy.
Yeah.
You know, no laws are probably better than new laws, and you know, a divided government, I think, results in more stasis.
More. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Is there any other scenario that has a high enough probability that we should consider? I mean, in our kind of thinking, we attach the baseline 45% probability to Harris divided government, then 35% Trump sweep, then 15% Trump divided government, 5% Democrat sweep. That's kind of how we've handicapped it. So we don't spend a whole lot of time on a Trump divided government or a Democrat sweep. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the Republicans would really have to blow it to lose the Senate.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like you're putting about a 15% chance on that.
Yeah.
You know, that's right in the ballpark of where I would put it.
Actually, very low, 5%. You know, where the Democrat sweep.
I thought, Democrat sweep, but I thought you gave Trump divided government. So in your Trump divided government, do
I
Democrats
give
win
it
the House?
15 on Trump divided government and
But
five,
who has
only
the
five.
Senate?
Republicans.
Okay, Republicans
Right.
still have the Senate. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So so maybe I'm attaching a higher probability to Republicans
Okay.
blowing the Senate than you are.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'd say it's less than a 1/5 chance.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, very good. I'm not sure whether I should be happy or nervous about the fact that we're so in line. I'm going to take the happy.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to take the happy.
At a time when happiness is rare, let's
Yeah, let's take it. Let's take it.
Yes.
Well, we've taken enough of your time. I really do appreciate it, and the conversation is always great and very informative. And thank you for coming on. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
it's
it.
always fun to see you and always fun to be with you guys.
Thanks so much. And
No, thank you.
Cris, Dante, anything last parting words? No? Okay.
Just thank you. Hope to see you again soon.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
And with that, dear listener, we're going to call this a podcast. Take care now. Talk to you next week.